Ryan Jacobs had always loved the desert. As a seasoned wilderness guide, he spent most of his time leading small groups through the dry, wide-open expanses of the southwestern United States. The desert was both peaceful and unforgiving. The endless stretches of sand, the jagged rock formations, and the sharp, clear sky gave it an eerie yet beautiful charm. Ryan had spent years becoming one with the landscape, understanding its patterns, knowing when to expect a storm, or when the temperature would climb to dangerous heights. It was a place that could break even the most seasoned adventurer, but Ryan knew how to survive in its harsh conditions. On this particular trip, he was guiding a small group of tourists who were keen on experiencing the desert up close. They were a mix of city dwellers who had never left the comfort of their modern lives. Their faces were filled with awe as they marveled at the vast desert. But Ryan could tell that some of them were already struggling with the heat. The dry air sucked the moisture from their bodies, and they looked more and more uncomfortable with every step. Still, Ryan pushed on, knowing that the desert could turn treacherous without warning. As the group walked deeper into the wilderness, Ryan noticed something that immediately caught his attention. Off in the distance, against the blazing sun, he spotted a figure stumbling across the sand. It was a woman. She looked out of place, a lone figure in the middle of nowhere, and Ryan's heart skipped a beat. In the desert, it wasn't uncommon to come across hikers who had lost their way or gotten into trouble. But this was different. The woman seemed to be struggling, almost as if she was barely holding herself together. Ryan's instincts kicked in immediately. He ordered his group to stop and told them to stay put while he went to investigate. As he moved closer, the woman's figure became clearer. She was thin, her clothes ragged, her skin covered in dust, and her face pale. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she seemed confused, almost delirious from exhaustion. She was stumbling as though she could barely keep herself upright. Ryan knew she was in trouble. The heat of the desert could be deadly, and it wasn't uncommon for travelers to become disoriented in its vastness. "Are you okay?" Ryan called out as he approached her, keeping his voice calm and steady. The woman's eyes met his, but there was no recognition in them. She appeared confused, her lips cracked from dehydration, and she could barely speak. She looked as though she had been wandering in the desert for days, maybe longer. Her movements were slow and uncoordinated, and she seemed on the brink of collapse. Ryan reached her just in time. As she tried to take another step, her legs buckled beneath her, and she would have fallen face first into the sand if Ryan hadn't caught her. His arms instinctively wrapped around her, supporting her weight as she leaned heavily against him. She was so light, almost fragile, and Ryan could feel the heat radiating from her body. Sweat dripped from her forehead, and her skin felt hot to the touch. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her eyes fluttered as if she was about to lose consciousness. "Hang on," Ryan said softly, his voice firm but gentle. "I've got you." He carefully helped her to her feet, steadying her with one arm around her waist. The woman leaned into him, her body trembling with exhaustion. It was clear that she had been out here for too long, and she needed help desperately. Ryan quickly reached into his backpack, pulling out a canteen of water. He offered it to her, and she took a few slow, careful sips. Her throat was dry, and it was as though the water was the first thing that had passed her lips in days. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. Ryan wasn't sure if she was truly aware of what was happening, but he nodded and smiled, hoping to reassure her. "Don't worry," Ryan said, his voice reassuring but urgent. "We're going to get you to safety." He looked back at his group, who were watching from a distance. He gestured for them to stay put, then turned his attention back to the woman. "What's your name?" "Why? What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her engaged and awake. She blinked a few times, as though struggling to remember, and then finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Kaya," she said quietly. "Kaya." Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. Kaya was from the Apache tribe. That much was clear from her features and the way she carried herself. He had met a few people from the Apache tribe in the past, but they had always been in more populated areas, far from the solitude of the desert. How had she ended up out here? The desert was a harsh place, especially for someone unfamiliar with it. "I'm Ryan," he said gently. "I'm going to help you. We're not far from camp, and I'll get you there soon." Kaya nodded faintly, but didn't say anything more. She seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness, her body barely holding on. Ryan knew they had to move quickly. As he helped her walk, he realized just how much of a struggle it was for her. She was barely able to keep her feet beneath her, and every step seemed to take every ounce of energy she had left. Ryan could see the fear in her eyes, fear of the desert, fear of being lost, and perhaps fear of what might happen if she didn't make it out. He knew the desert could break a person, strip them of everything they had. They were now a good distance from the rest of the group, but Ryan had no choice but to press forward. He couldn't afford to lose time. Kaya was weak, and the longer they stayed out here, the more dangerous it would be. With each step, Ryan tried to keep her talking, keeping her engaged as best as he could. He asked her questions about her life, about her tribe, anything to keep her awake and focused. Kaya responded in small, strained sentences. She explained that she had been separated from her people during a storm that had swept through the desert. Her group had been moving through the wilderness when a violent dust storm had suddenly hit. She had been separated from the others, lost in the chaos, and had wandered for days without food or water. Kaya had been struggling to survive on her own, but the desert was a harsh teacher, and it had taken its toll. Ryan listened carefully, trying to understand her situation. He knew that the desert could be merciless to those who didn't know it well, but Kaya's resilience was evident. Even though she was on the brink of collapse, she still managed to find the strength to speak and to keep going, even if it was just one step at a time. It was clear that she wasn't someone who gave up easily. As they made their way forward, Ryan couldn't help but admire Kaya's strength. He had spent years in the wilderness, but he had never experienced the kind of hardships she had. She had survived for days on her own in the desert, a place that most people couldn't last more than a few hours without proper supplies. Ryan wasn't sure how much longer Kaya could go on, but he refused to let her give up. He knew that without his help, she might not have made it. As they moved, Ryan's mind raced with questions. How had she ended up out here alone? What would have happened if he hadn't found her? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small rock formation where Ryan had set up camp earlier. He quickly helped Kaya sit down in the shade and gave her more water. Her eyes were half closed, and she was barely able to speak now, but Ryan could tell she was relieved to be out of the open desert. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, Ryan settled down beside her, his thoughts still racing. He had saved her life, but something inside him told him this was only the beginning of something much deeper. Ryan had done everything he could to get Kaya to safety. After hours of walking through the desert, helping her every step of the way, they finally made it to his camp. He had set it up earlier in the day for his group, a small oasis of shade under a rocky outcrop, but now, it felt like a small refuge for Kaya. She slumped against the rock, exhausted but relieved to be out of the sun. The warmth of the evening breeze swept across the desert, cooling the air just enough to bring some comfort. Ryan sat down beside her, giving her space but staying close enough to keep an eye on her. He handed her the water again, watching as she took small sips. Her body had clearly been drained by the desert heat, but she seemed to be gathering some strength with every drop of water. Kaya's face was still pale, and her eyes seemed distant, but there was a flicker of gratitude in them. Ryan noticed how the strong features of her face softened in the dim light, and for the first time since he had found her, she seemed almost at peace. As he sat beside her, Ryan found himself staring at the desert. The vastness of it, the endless stretches of sand and rock, always had a way of making him feel small. It was easy to lose yourself here. Ryan often told his clients that the desert could teach you things. It could show you just how resilient the human spirit was, how much people could endure when they had to. And yet, it also reminded him of how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could slip away in such a harsh environment. The fire crackled beside them as they sat in silence. The group Ryan had been guiding had gone to bed early, most of them exhausted from the day's journey. Kaya had barely said a word since they'd reached the camp, and Ryan didn't want to push her. She needed rest, but he couldn't stop thinking about her story, the storm that had separated her from her people. The days she must have spent wandering in the desert alone. She was a survivor. But he could tell it had taken a toll on her. Kaya finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry," she said, her words slow, as though she were choosing them carefully. "I didn't expect to find anyone out here." She paused, her gaze fixed on the fire. "I didn't know if I would survive." Ryan looked at her, his heart heavy. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "I'm not going to leave you." Kaya nodded but didn't respond. She seemed to be lost in thought. Ryan respected her silence, but his curiosity about her was growing. He had to know more about her, about where she came from, and how she had ended up alone in the desert. He knew that she had to have incredible strength to survive what she had been through. But even strength had its limits, and the toll of the desert was often more than anyone could bear. "What happened after the storm?" Ryan asked gently, hoping to keep the conversation going without overwhelming her. "How did you end up out here?" Kaya shifted slightly, but it was clear she was still weak. She seemed to gather her thoughts before answering, her voice a little shaky at first. "We were traveling with my people," she began, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "We had just crossed into the desert when the storm hit. The wind came from nowhere, so strong, so fast. My people. We were scattered in the storm. I couldn't find them. I tried to call out, but the wind was too loud. And the dust, I couldn't see anything." Ryan nodded, understanding. The desert storms could be brutal. They could blind you in seconds, strip you of any sense of direction. It was a place where even the most experienced travelers could lose their way. "I walked for days," Kaya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could find water, that I could find my way back. But the desert, it doesn't care. It takes what it wants." She sighed, a deep, almost tired sound. "I thought I was going to die out there. I've heard the stories, people who wander into the desert and never come back." Ryan felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had been fortunate. He knew how to navigate the desert, how to find water, how to survive when things got tough. But Kaya? She was out there alone, with no experience in the desert. And somehow, she had made it, but the desert had worn her down. "What did you do?" Ryan asked, his voice soft, trying to understand how she had kept going. He wanted to know what drove her, what kept her alive when it seemed like there was no hope. Kaya glanced at him, and for a moment, Ryan thought she might not answer. But then she spoke, her voice steady now, though still carrying a weight of exhaustion. "I remembered what my grandmother taught me. She used to tell me that the desert was alive, that it could hear you, feel your fear, but it would give you what you needed if you showed respect, if you trusted the land." Ryan listened intently, unsure of what to say. He had heard many stories about how different people viewed the desert, but hearing Kaya speak of it in such a spiritual way gave him a new perspective. The desert was more than just a place. It was a part of her, and her people. It was a living thing. Kaya continued, her voice a little softer now, almost as if she was sharing a secret. "I spoke to the land. I told it I was lost, that I needed help, and I kept walking." She looked at Ryan, a slight smile on her face. "And it helped me. It always led me towards something, even if it was just a little shade or a small creek hidden under the rocks. But it was never enough." Ryan could see the strength in her words, but there was also a hint of sorrow. The desert had given her just enough to keep going, but it had never been easy. Kaya wasn't someone who expected anything to be handed to her. She had to fight for every step, every bit of water, every moment of relief. After a long pause, Ryan spoke. "You're a survivor, Kaya. I've seen people give up in less time than you've been out here. You've got something inside of you, something strong. Kaya didn't respond right away. She just sat there, staring at the fire. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to die alone out there. I couldn't let the desert take me. She closed her eyes, her face softening with the weight of the memories. But now, I don't know what to do. My people are out there, and I'm here. I don't know if they're still alive. Ryan could feel the weight of her words. Her journey wasn't just about survival. It was about finding her people, about reuniting with her family, and in the desert, that was a much harder challenge than just finding water or shelter. We'll find them, Ryan said firmly. We'll figure this out together. Kaya didn't respond, but Ryan could see a small spark of hope in her eyes. She believed him, even if just a little. And that was enough. For now, it was enough for Ryan to know that he wasn't just helping her survive. He was helping her keep a piece of her spirit alive. The desert was unforgiving, but Kaya had shown him that even in its harshest corners, there was room for hope. Ryan had made a promise to Kaya that they would find her people, and he intended to keep it. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Ryan could feel the heat of the day creeping in. Even though the early hours were still cool, he had spent most of the night awake, thinking about Kaya's story and how much they still had to face. They had made it through the worst of the desert's harshest elements, but the journey was far from over. Kaya still needed rest, and they both needed to figure out their next steps. The first thing Ryan did when the camp awoke was prepare a quick meal. He knew Kaya needed food to regain her strength, and the others in the group would need a few more hours of rest before they could continue on the trail. The camp was quiet, save for the soft crackling of the small fire and the occasional rustle of someone shifting in their sleep. The vast desert stretched out beyond them, and the horizon seemed like it went on forever. As Kaya stirred from her sleep, Ryan offered her some dried fruits and nuts. Her face still looked drawn, but she had regained some of the energy she had lost the day before. She took the food hesitantly, not used to being looked after like this. Kaya was used to relying on herself, used to surviving on her own, but now she was in a strange position. For the first time in days, she had no choice but to accept help. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice still raspy. Ryan nodded, understanding her gratitude but also sensing the deep unease within her. She wasn't used to relying on others, especially someone outside her own people. We're going to find your tribe, Kaya, Ryan said as he sat beside her, his voice steady and confident. He had no doubt that they would find them. The desert was vast, but it wasn't an impossible place to navigate, especially when you had the right knowledge and guidance. I'll stay with you. We'll search until we find them. Kaya gave him a small, weary smile. You don't have to, she said softly. You've already done so much for me. Ryan smiled back, though his expression was serious. It's not about what I have to do. I'm here because I want to help. For a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. Kaya had been through so much, and yet, there was a calmness in her eyes now. A quiet trust that wasn't there before. Maybe it was because she had started to believe in Ryan's words. Maybe it was because the hope of reuniting with her people was enough to keep her going. Whatever it was, Ryan felt a deep responsibility to help her see this journey through. As the morning wore on, Ryan gathered his things and prepared the group to move out. The temperature was already beginning to rise, and they couldn't afford to wait much longer. Kaya had told him that her tribe typically camped in a certain part of the desert, near a small stream that ran through the mountains. It wasn't an easy area to reach, but it was their best bet. Ryan knew the area, and he was confident they could make it there in a day or two, depending on the weather and the terrain. The group set off, and Kaya walked beside Ryan, still a little unsteady but much stronger than the day before. The journey was slow, but Ryan could tell she was gaining confidence with each step. He kept a close eye on her, making sure she wasn't pushing herself too hard. The desert was unforgiving, but Kaya had an inner strength that kept her moving forward, even when her body wanted to stop. As they moved through the vast landscape, Ryan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The desert was unlike any place he had ever been, and it seemed to change with every turn. One moment, they were walking through wide, open spaces with nothing but sand and rock for miles. The next, they were in the shadow of towering cliffs, the air cooler and more humid as they descended into a narrow canyon. The landscape had a way of constantly shifting, like the desert itself was alive and changing with the passing hours. Kaya seemed to notice it too, though she didn't comment on it. Instead, she simply focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Ryan respected her silence. She wasn't complaining. Even though she must have been exhausted, she was determined, and that determination kept her going. By mid-afternoon, the group stopped for a rest. Ryan found a small shaded area under a rock formation where they could cool off and drink some water. The temperature was climbing, and they all needed a break. Kaya, too, sat down, though she didn't look too comfortable. She was still adjusting to the rhythm of traveling with a group, and it wasn't easy for her to let go of the self-sufficiency she had always relied on. Ryan walked over to her as she sat by herself, her eyes distant again, staring off into the desert. He could tell she was lost in thought, perhaps thinking of her tribe or wondering what had become of them. "I know it's hard," Ryan said quietly as he approached. "I know you're used to being alone, but I'm here to help. You're not alone anymore." Kaya looked up at him, and for the first time, she seemed truly vulnerable. "I don't know what to do," she admitted softly. "I thought I could find my way back on my own, but now, I don't know if I'm even going in the right direction." Ryan sat down next to her, his eyes soft with understanding. He knew the feeling of being lost, of not knowing what came next. He knew what it was like to be so far from everything familiar that it seemed impossible to find your way back. "You're doing great," Ryan said gently. "We're going to get there. It's not easy, but we've made it this far." "You've made it this far." Kaya gave a small nod, but it was clear she still had doubts. Ryan could see the weight of her worries in her eyes. She wasn't just concerned about the physical journey. She was carrying the emotional burden of losing her tribe, of wondering if they were still alive, and whether they would ever be reunited. As they sat there in silence, Ryan glanced over at the rest of the group. They were spread out, resting in the shade, but there was a calm energy around them. The desert, despite its brutal conditions, had a strange way of bringing people together. There was something about surviving in such an unforgiving place that made everyone feel a little more connected. It was as if they were all in this together, no matter how different their lives were. Ryan turned his attention back to Kaya, who was looking down at the ground, her fingers tracing the sand. "You've got a strength in you that's hard to explain," Ryan said quietly. "It's the kind of strength that comes from surviving things others can't even imagine. I've seen it in people before, and I see it in you." Kaya didn't respond right away, but she looked up at him, and for a moment, Ryan saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude or relief, it was something deeper. It was trust. As they rested for the afternoon, the desert continued to stretch out before them, endless and mysterious. Ryan knew that finding Kaya's tribe wouldn't be easy, but with every step they took, he was more certain that they would get there. The desert might be vast, but it wasn't as empty as it seemed. It held secrets, and it had already given them something precious, the chance to find something lost. With each passing day, Kaya was healing. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Ryan knew that the next part of the journey would be the most challenging, but it would also be the most rewarding. They were getting closer to finding her people, and Ryan felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The desert had its challenges, but it also had a way of making you appreciate the moments when you weren't alone, when you could rely on each other. That was something he would hold on to, something he had learned from Kaya. The desert had changed in ways Ryan couldn't quite explain. What had once felt like an intimidating, endless stretch of sand and rock now felt more like a place of possibility, even in its harshness. As the days passed, Ryan, Kaya, and the group continued their journey deeper into the wilderness, following the faint trail Kaya remembered from her past. With each step, Ryan found himself admiring Kaya more and more, her strength, her resilience, and her ability to keep moving forward, despite the overwhelming odds. She had come so far, and now, after everything, they were close to the place where her tribe had once camped. But as close as they were, there was still an underlying uncertainty in the air, an uncertainty that was hard to shake off. Kaya's silence had become less tense. Her body had started to recover, and her strength was returning. The way she carried herself now was different, more assured. She was still cautious, but it was clear she was beginning to trust Ryan and the desert, too. There was something about her spirit that had come alive again, something he hadn't seen when they first met. Perhaps it was the knowledge that she was finally heading toward the one thing that had been driving her, the hope of finding her people again. But there was still the question of whether they would make it. Ryan had always been a realist. He knew how dangerous the desert could be. And as much as he hoped they'd find the tribe, there was no guarantee. The desert wasn't just a place of beauty and awe, it was also a place where things got lost forever. People disappeared in these vast stretches, and sometimes, even the best guides couldn't bring them back. As they made their way through another canyon that day, the rocky walls towering above them, Ryan couldn't help but feel the weight of their journey. The sun was beating down, but the air had a dry crispness to it that made everything feel a little sharper. Kaya walked beside him, a little slower than before, but still steady. There was a quiet determination in her eyes that told Ryan she wouldn't stop, no matter how hard it got. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, noticing how she seemed to be more tired than usual. Kaya's footsteps were a little heavier, her pace slower, as though she was fighting against something inside herself. Kaya glanced at him, her expression softening. "I'm okay," she said, though Ryan could tell she wasn't being entirely truthful. "Just thinking about your tribe?" Ryan asked carefully, knowing the answer already. Kaya had been thinking about them for days, ever since they had begun this journey. The uncertainty of whether they were still out there, of whether they had been able to survive without her, weighed heavily on her. Ryan could see that it was a burden she had carried for far too long. Kaya nodded. "I can't stop thinking about them. Wondering if they're still alive. If they're waiting for me." She paused, her voice growing faint. "I don't even know if they'll recognize me." Ryan stopped walking, giving her a moment. He could feel the weight of her words, and though he couldn't fully understand the pain of losing her tribe, he could see the depth of it in her eyes. It wasn't just about survival. It was about home. It was about a connection to something larger than herself, something that defined who she was. The desert might have been a part of her, but her people were her roots. "We're close," Ryan said softly, trying to reassure her. "We'll find them. I know we will." Kaya gave him a weak smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but the fear and doubt were still there, lingering beneath the surface. Ryan could feel it too, that gnawing uncertainty that seemed to settle into the pit of his stomach. But he couldn't show it. Not now. Kaya needed to see confidence in him, even if he didn't feel completely sure himself. They continued their journey in silence after that, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the sand and stone beneath them. The landscape seemed to stretch out endlessly in front of them, the towering cliffs on either side of them offering no answers, only the quiet hum of the wind. The group had fallen behind, taking their time to rest and recover from the journey, but Ryan knew they were getting closer to the place Kaya had described. They were near the foothills of a mountain range, and if the signs Kaya had remembered were right, they were only a few miles from the area where her tribe had once camped. As they walked, Ryan began to notice the subtle changes in the environment. The air felt cooler, a sign that they were nearing higher ground. The desert landscape had slowly started to shift, the sand giving way to rocks, and the sparse cacti and scrub brush were replaced by thicker vegetation. There was a sense of change, and with it, a quiet hope that maybe this was the place Kaya had been searching for. By late afternoon, they arrived at a narrow valley, surrounded by tall rock walls that seemed to close in around them. The sunlight cast long shadows across the valley floor, and the temperature dropped as the evening approached. Ryan felt the change in the air, the desert's chill settling in after a hot day. Kaya stopped suddenly, her eyes scanning the valley, her face unreadable. Ryan stopped beside her, wondering what she was seeing. She was searching for something, something she recognized. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she looked at the landscape before her eyes flicking from one rock formation to another. "This is it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This is where we camped. This is where my people were." Ryan looked around, seeing nothing but an empty, silent valley. There were no signs of life. No smoke rising from a fire. No sound of voices in the distance. Just the stillness of the desert. "How do you know?" Ryan asked, trying to understand. Kaya didn't respond immediately. Her eyes still fixed on the valley ahead. She walked a few steps forward, her feet making soft crunching sounds in the sand as she moved, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "I remember the way the rocks were," she said after a long pause. "The way the valley looked when the sun set. I remember my people sitting around the fire, telling stories, sharing food. It feels like they're still here." Her voice faltered a little, but she steadied herself quickly. "I don't know if they're still alive, but this is where I belong." Ryan watched her closely, seeing the pain and hope mingling in her expression. He knew she had been holding on to this place, this memory, for so long. This was the moment she had been waiting for. And it was difficult for Ryan to even imagine what it felt like to stand here, knowing that everything she had once known was potentially gone. "Do you think they're still here?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle. Kaya's eyes flickered with a mix of uncertainty and longing. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what's left." Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "We'll look for signs," he said firmly. "We'll search the valley. Look for any clues. We can't give up yet." Kaya nodded slowly, though her heart was heavy. She had hoped to find her people waiting for her, to see familiar faces, to feel the warmth of her tribe once again. But the silence of the valley was all that greeted them. No smoke, no signs of life, only the wind whispering through the desert. They spent the next few hours combing through the area, searching for anything that might hint at the presence of the tribe. Ryan kept an eye on Kaya, knowing how much this meant to her. As the day faded into night, they gathered by a small rock formation, where Kaya sat silently, staring into the fire. Ryan joined her, offering her a small bowl of food. She took it without saying much, still lost in thought. "I'm sorry," Ryan said quietly, his voice filled with empathy. "I know this isn't what you hoped for." "I know this isn't what you hoped for." Kaya shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've given me more than I could have asked for," she whispered. "You brought me here, and that's more than anyone could do." Ryan sat quietly beside her, watching the flames flicker in the fire. He didn't have any answers, but he knew this journey had brought them closer to something important. It wasn't just about finding her tribe, it was about reconnecting with what mattered most to Kaya. And no matter what happened next, Ryan knew that she would carry the strength of this journey with her for the rest of her life. The desert had taken a lot from her, but it had also given her a chance to reclaim something precious, a part of herself. And that, in the end, was something no desert could ever take away.